Hello and welcome to the Handplane Challenge. I'm Mark, your host and referee. Today is the first challenge in the series and will feature a challenge between the Stanley Bailey and the Stanley Bedrock. Now, as I mentioned in the introductory video, these two planes are very common. This challenge may not have as much new material as some people might like. However, I felt like because these planes are A, ubiquitous, and B, sort of the standards against which all other planes are judged, I felt like we really had to do this challenge first. So bear with me. If it's not as new and informative as you might have liked, stick around and we'll get to more interesting planes in subsequent sessions. So to start off with, we're going to take these guys apart and see what makes them tick. And after that, we're going to see if we can make shavings with them. So onward to the rest of the program. Okay, here are our two contestants. First up is the Stanley Bailey, shown right here. This plane dates to the period between 1910 and 1920. It is a Type 11. We know it's a Type 11 because it's got 3 patent dates behind the frog. It's got a low knob. Those are really the two dead giveaways on it. There are many different characteristics used to date a plane, and we're not going to go into plane dating in great detail here, but except to say that you can find some good references. People have flow charts and spreadsheets and documents that describe how to date a Stanley Bailey plane. But this one is pretty firmly in the Type 11 category, 1910 to 1920. One slight possible exception to that is the cutter in it is a Stanley Sweetheart type, designated by a little heart here with an SW in the middle. That actually is probably dating to about 1920 or so, and so it may be a little later than the rest of this plane, suggesting that it's probably not the original cutter that came with the plane, but rather maybe one that was added on later. Nonetheless, it is the same general time period, so that's okay. Our other contestant is the Stanley Bedrock. It also dates to the same time period, which is good for today's discussion. It's nice to be able to compare planes from the same time period. We won't be able to do that in every single case. I don't, have that many planes. But in this case, it works out pretty well. This is a Type 5. 2 patent dates behind the frog. Bedrock embossed in the body, 604. Tall knob. Bedrock in the lever cap. Flat sides. All these things are pretty good for a Type 5 Stanley Bedrock. Even the cutter here, this is a T-type trademark, whereas the other one on the Bailey was a Sweetheart type trademark. This is the so-called T trademark, and that is actually pretty consistent with a Type 5 plane, so that may well be that this cutter came with the plane originally. Okay, now we're going to take these two guys apart and see what makes them tick. So I'm going to take the Bailey apart first. We're going to take the lever cap off, take the cutter out, and here's the frog. Now this machined surface in here is what the frog rests on very securely, and this is in turn securely resting on machined surfaces between the frog and the body of the plane. So that basically the plane cutter is very securely linked to the body of the plane. Alright, so in the Bailey cases, the frog is held in with these screws. We're going to go ahead and take them out. There's one, there's the other. Okay. Alright, that's all you need to do to get the frog out. While I'm here, I just want to point out, because it was harder to see before, the 3 patent dates are here. It's still probably a little hard to see in the video, but it's much easier to see now than when the plane is assembled. You can see, so basically the machined surfaces that the frog rests on are here, these 2, and these 2. So that the frog rests in there just like that, very, very securely on those machined surfaces. Now, Bailey was famous for the reason his name is cast into the body of millions of planes is that he had 2 really big innovations. He had a lot of other innovations, don't get me wrong, but on planes, one of his big inventions was the removable frog. The concept of the removable frog allowed you to manufacture the plane body separately from the frog, and it was much easier and less expensive to get the whole thing manufactured and assembled than when you tried to make when you tried to machine the body to securely hold the cutter in a fixed position. Okay, what we're going to do here is put the frog in here and see how it works. Another innovation that Stanley made, but it wasn't Bailey, is there's a little screw here that is used to engage with this receiver here, and that allows you to easily move the frog back and forth. That came later. That was not Bailey, but still a good invention nonetheless. So we're going to put this stuff in here without the screws, and I'm going to hold it in there with my thumb and turn the screw so that you can see what happens. You tighten it up and the mouth gets tighter. Turn the screw out and the frog moves backwards and opens the mouth. And you can get a pretty wide mouth on this one. Eventually you back it up so much that the cutter runs into the rear edge of the mouth there, and you want to stop before you get to that point, because at that point you're lifting the cutter off the frog and you won't have the advantage of that secure holding. Okay, so that's Bailey. I'm going to just sort of leave this stuff loosely together like that. Now let's take apart the Bedrock. Okay, lever cap off, cutter out. Now we can see it looks different now. The actual surface of the frog looks more or less the same, so that's not a problem, but you can see that instead of screws here we have these flat topped pieces of hardware. In a Bedrock, actually, it's held in with these screws here by a fairly ingenious mechanism, which I'll show in just a minute. So I'm going to back these screws out so we can take the frog out. There we go. Okay, so the big difference between, let those out, what you can see here is that the Bedrock has a large area of machined surface here, one continuous machined surface. That was what Stanley claimed that would match up with this machined surface and provide a much more, solid foundation for the frog. So large machine surface here mating with this one, and it slides back and forth like that. Now there's a few things I want to point out here. Is it's held in with kind of an ingenious set of screws, and there's probably a terminology for these things. I don't know that I know what it is off the top of my head, but these screws have points on the end that engage with this hollow part of this receiver, and so as the screw moves forward, when you screw it in, it drags this holder down and thus tightens the frog against the machined surface. So fairly, someone had to think a lot to come up with that idea. Okay, so that's one thing. It's the different mechanism of holding the frog down securely. Now, the other thing that's maybe not always obvious to people, you can see, if I can get the right, basically that machined surface slopes downward like that. So when you're moving the frog, the cutter, when you move it back and forth, the cutter is going to move in the same manner. Unlike the Bailey, where those machined surfaces that move back and forth more or less parallel with the bottom of the plane, in this case it moves downhill. So when you adjust the frog, and we're going to go ahead and do that here, it does the same sort of frog adjuster. That's the same as the Bailey, but when you move it back and forth, moves in, moves out. But when it does that, the cutter has to be readjusted. It's no longer in the right position to take a shaving. So you move the frog, and then secondarily you have to readjust the cutter. So it's not really something that you do on the fly. And so unlike setting the depth, when you're planing along, you're sitting here and you need it to be a little less or a little more, you just take your finger and change the depth adjustment. Changing the frog adjustment is a bigger deal, requiring more more incentive. Okay, what else do we want to say? That's pretty much the biggest two differences between the Bedrock and the Bailey. So I'm going to go ahead and put it back together here, show how it tightens down. We're going to put these cap screws in, and then we're going to tighten them down. See, now you can see that it's grabbing that thing and really holding it down. Okay. That is pretty much the guts of these two guys. Now we're going to move on and see if we can take a shaving with them and see how they compare. Okay. As I said in the introductory video, this is a 6/4 piece, 8/4 piece of soft maple clamped edge up along the edge of the bench here. Soft maple is about as standard as hardwood as you can get, middle of the road. So it's sort of a good representation for how a plane will work in a hardwood. One sort of detail that I forgot to mention on these guys is there are lots of good references out there. One of the best references on the sort of physical attributes of these planes is the Blood and Gore page maintained by Patrick Leach. If you look in his Blood and Gore summary, these two planes weigh practically the same amount. I mean, there's a little bit of difference, that they are the same length, they do the same width. So, you know, obviously, as we just discussed, the frogs are very different, but in most other respects, the dimensions and so forth of the planes are practically identical. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to start out with both planes. I've got them set to a sort of small mouth. And I should also mention that the chip breaker, I always put my chip breakers, like, holy smokes, they're close to the edge of the blade. I've never actually tried to measure it, but it can't be much more than a 64th of an inch, maybe 32nd. It's close. And that's, I think, kind of the standard recommendation for these things. That's something that anybody could always, you know, play around with a little bit to optimize their planes. So chip breaker close to the edge, mouth pretty much as narrow as you could make it. And now we're going to see how they work. So here we go with the Bailey. Making a pretty decent full width of the board cut. Maybe I can make it just a little more centered on the blade here. See if it'll, there we go. Pushes pretty easily, sharpen the blade. That just doesn't get much better than that. You know, another thing I should comment, I always camber my blades, so, you know, it's not going to cut across the full width of the blade, and you normally don't want that, because if you did, you'd be leaving plane tracks all over your little lines all over the work that you're trying to plane. So there you have it. That's the Bailey. And now the Bedrock. Just as good, not any better really, and about the same amount of, you know, I got them about the same. I've sharpened so many plane blades by now that I'm semi-reproducible, I would say. It was about the same effort to push both of the planes through the wood. Full length blade from both. Maybe you can't tell in the video, but there is just not a lot different about these two shavings. Okay. And, you know, if there was any difference there in how well the frog was bedding to the body, it wasn't obvious to me. So just to keep going a little bit here, I'm going to open up the mouth a little bit on the Bailey here and see what difference that might make. Bear with me. Okay, now we're going to crank it back quite a bit. I don't know if I want to open it up all the way. I actually don't normally work with them opened up all the way, so that would be sort of foreign territory for me. Put it back together. Now we're going to have to, still going to have to adjust things here. Even though that frog is nominally moving about the same there, I almost always find that I have to redo this. Probably because you have to take the cutter out. I mean, things just aren't going to go back together exactly the same way. Okay, so there's a fairly much wider mouth. I don't know if I'm a little off to one side. Keep going. There we go. In the middle. Still working pretty good, even for the Bailey. So again, a nice shaving. It wasn't obvious to me that that would be a little bit more of a stress test to have the mouth backed out wide like that. But I don't know that it made really much of any difference. Well, now we'll just to be fair, we'll do the same thing with the Bedrock. Okay, so going for a wide mouth on this thing has turned out to be more problematic than I thought. You can see here that moving the frog back has made it so that the blade is riding on the bed right here, because you can see that it's lifting off of the frog right there. Not a good situation. So basically it sort of still works. I'll grant, it's taking a fine shaving, but if that doesn't eliminate the advantage of the machining on the frog, I don't know what would. So let's take a look at it here and see what I've done. I almost always use my planes with narrow mouths. For smoothers, I think that's kind of the obvious choice. So you can see it, I don't even have it all the way back here. I've still got some distance to travel, but it was clearly bottoming out. You can see that if I raise the blade up, it will now ride, that gap will eliminate and it will ride against the frog. That sort of discrepancy is disappearing, but of course that's completely useless because it's so far inside the plane that it won't ever take the cut. So there's something even I learn a little bit new when I do these things, and so frankly, it was a lot easier to get a wide mouth out of the Bailey than it was out of the Bedrock. They both work great with narrow mouths, which is how I use them, but I certainly could get a wider mouth more easily out of the Bailey than I could the Bedrock. So, live and learn. Okay, so there you have it. The Bailey produced a beautiful shaving, worked well with both a narrow and an open mouth. The Bedrock also produced a beautiful shaving, absolutely gorgeous, easy, about the same effort as with the Bailey. The Bedrock was good. If I had to say one thing, I would say that maybe the controls are a little more tighter on the Bedrock, but that could just be a function of age. This Bailey in particular was my user for many years. I've used it on many a project, and the only reason it's no longer my user is I have so many planes that I like to use a new one every time I do something. In today's market, you can buy at least 2 Baileys for every Bedrock, and maybe almost 3. So, given that they both make excellent shavings, and you can probably buy a Type 11 or somewhere thereabouts for 1/3 to 1/2 the amount of money of a Bedrock. And if you go for a rescue operation, this was actually pretty much a rescue plane, paint spattered, rusty, so I've cleaned it up in order to get it to this shape, even though it may not look it that much. You could get one for even less money if you're willing to invest some time and effort to clean it up and retune it. So given all that, I mean, in today's competition, I'd have to say that the Bailey was the clear winner. So I'm sure there'll be contrary opinions out there. Please leave your comments below. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, and stay tuned for the next episode.